pass for William. Daniels for the win. It's gone. LSU does it. Directing receivers, flips it to the end zone. Caught. Touchdown. Marvin Harrison Jr. making a huge impact.
Here's Edwards with the lay. Donovan Edwards down the sideline. Gets past Ransom. Donovan Edwards. Touchdown, Michigan.
Welcome into the final edition of our preseason preview series, where today we're talking SEC. Mike, here we go, man. The last of the preseason preview series. We're in the SEC. Man, look, might as well buckle in, right? Because some of these, the Big Ten, the SEC, we tend to have quite a bit to talk about. May go a little bit long, but that's okay, man. These are always fun. Anything that you want to anything jumping out at you as you kind of prepping for the show, doing all these drafts throughout the spring and summer in regards to the SEC. We talked about how the Pac-12, a lot of quarterbacks there. Anything really kind of a theme for the SEC for you this offseason?
You've asked me that for every podcast, and you'd think I would come prepared to at least one of them. And this being the last one, you really think I would have come prepared. I don't know. I haven't drafted a lot of SEC players, to be honest with you. Maybe it's because I don't really watch a lot of SEC football. It's just not my obviously I live in the Midwest, so I don't particularly watch a lot of their games. But yeah, I mean, I think Alabama is a big storyline, and we'll get to them, down the road or down the line here in this podcast. How, not a lot of interest in usually we have 2 to 3 top tier Alabama players in college fantasy. Not the case this year. Georgia's going to be really, really good, but limited fantasy assets. And I don't know, I don't know, not a lot of interest for me with the SEC teams this year. Just better football teams on the field than actual, I think, fantasy assets. That's my opinion.
Well, I think, we talked a little bit just before the show, just before we kind of went live here. As I mentioned, even though Tennessee, changing offensive coordinator, it's going to be Heupel system, right? But when you look, technically 8 new offensive coordinators in the SEC. So, that's at least a little interesting, and we'll get into some of that. So might as well just jump into it, man. Let's just start. Let's start with Arkansas, who Kendall Briles heads over to TCU, and they replace him with Dan Enos, who comes over from Maryland, right? Now, this is his second stint here with Arkansas. Had a very successful stint last time he was here. Did some really good things with that Maryland offense. Raheim Sanders, one of our top 5 running backs this year in the preseason. So one of our top backs on the board this year going into 2023. But when you look at that offense and the personnel, are there other players that we should be aware of other than Raheim Sanders and maybe quarterback KJ Jefferson?
Not really. I don't know. I have Marquise Gums, the North Texas transfer at tight end. I have him as a top 20 quarterback just because of the utilization of the tight end position in Dan Enos's offense. We know that Dan Enos typically, they're going to be a slower offense under Dan Enos. And if you kind of at his time at Maryland and even at his previous stint with Arkansas, they throw it a little bit more than Kendall Briles did. So, I mean, maybe that could work out for the tight end position. There's not a lot of proven entities at the wide receiver spot. I think the thing that I get nervous about with Gums is that he's just, he committed to Arkansas, then decommitted, and then now he's back, and he missed or he wasn't with the team during the spring. So, I think he would be the player outside of KJ Jefferson and Raheim Sanders that I would have the most interest in. Where are you at with the
I think for me, Raheim Sanders is top 5 for both of us. KJ Jefferson is a great dual threat fantasy asset. You got to figure he's landed somewhere around quarterback 20 or within the top 20 for both of us. I think really where I'm hung up is that we know that Enos likes to use the tight end. To your point, Gums seems like a little wishy-washy with what he's done right now. Maybe he sticks. And I think for, when I look at the Maryland passing game when Enos was there, there were a couple, he had Raheem Jarrett as well. So there were some known commodities in the passing game that you and I were looking at as fantasy assets just, the last couple of years. I think it's the fact that we just don't know a lot about their receivers right now going into the new season, that these guys really aren't on our radar right now. But like we've mentioned with a lot of other conferences and other teams, right now we have Andrew Armstrong pegged at wide receiver 1, Isaiah Santana is in there as well at wide receiver 2. We've got to keep an eye on some of these names throughout preseason camp because they could emerge as fantasy assets down the line. We just don't see them right now, but there's no proven track record with any of these guys right now.
Not at this level. No. I think it's a good group of receivers. I think they're going to have a lot of depth at the position, but we've spoken about this with a couple teams. BYU comes to mind. Just a lot of kind of wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s amongst the contributors at receiver. I don't think they're going to have a surefire standout at the position. So probably it'll be good for the passing game as a whole, but I don't see any viable options or draftable options in college fantasy within that group. I just have, and maybe it's overthinking it, I just have more questions with this roster than anything else. I mean, look at KJ Jefferson. He's improved with every single season that he's been the starter. He was up to 68% completion rate last year. But Dan Enos is never, just looking back, he's never had a running quarterback like KJ Jefferson. How does he kind of acclimate to his playing style? Do we see KJ Jefferson get less carries because of the amount of depth that at running back that Arkansas has? And then, I kind of mentioned it at the start with Enos, like he's going to play at a slower pace. We'll probably throw it a little bit more than Kendall Briles. Does that result in less production from Raheim Sanders? So, again, that could be very much overthinking it. Raheim Sanders has been a workhorse in the past, and KJ Jefferson obviously is a top 20 surefire fantasy quarterback, or he has been in the past. So, I don't know. That's kind of where I stand with the Razorbacks this year.
Fair assessment. I'm not too, we don't differ much on that. It's Jefferson, Sanders, and kind of wait and see on everybody else right now. Let's go over to Auburn, where, look, a lot of questions there too. Hugh Freeze has done a tremendous job in the transfer portal, one of the best portal classes. Now that we're ranking those nowadays, grabs, recruits Peyton Thorne away from Michigan State. Jair Shorter comes in from North Texas, who left a really good system with Eric Morris coming in. So that's a big win there for Auburn. They, even add depth. They've got Coy Moore. They've got Shane Hooks, who found his way there through a Jackson State transfer, who originally started out, I believe, at Ohio. Rivaldo Fairweather, the tight end over at FIU, who had a decent year last year. So there are, and of course, you've still got Robbie Ashford coming back. We don't want to assume that quarterback job's open because it's still being talked about as if it is a quarterback battle. Where I stand is I have a hard time believing they're bringing Peyton Thorne in to really ride the bench. I think it's his job to lose going into camp. And then we've got the running back position. Jarquez Hunter comes back. There was some, there was a story around him in the spring that really questioned his availability. But what we're hearing through the grapevine is, not much time missed at all, maybe one game. So I think you're going to have a pretty solid offense here for Hugh Freeze in his first year at Auburn, rebuilt maybe. A lot of it's going to come down to that quarterback position and who can really anchor down and improve that offense. But when you look at fantasy assets, Mike, let's just start right there. For me, it's kind of Jarquez Hunter and wait and see on everybody else right now. Where do you stand on Auburn? Any difference?
Yeah, you better clarify who's the grapevine that we heard the Jarquez Hunter news rumors from, because he'll let you hear about it if you don't attribute credit to him. Chris K, a friend of the show, he kind of posted in our Discord, which you should all be signed up for. But he kind of posted in there that the expectation as of right now, and he heard from his wife's parents, trainer. This news,
Man,
who
you
I guess
going
is-
deep. I heard it on an Auburn podcast. So even those guys were talking about it as well. So
Yeah,
it's getting around.
there you go. But yeah, so I guess the expectation is, 1 game max. This isn't, I mean, we don't have official news, and this is just speculation, rumors at this point, but we don't expect Jarquez Hunter to miss more than, a game or two at this point. And because there's really hasn't been any official news that he's been suspended or anything like that. So, it goes without saying that, Hugh Freeze is the head coach, and he's been, he would let these things kind of fly under the radar and let them pass in the past. So I think Jarquez Hunter is definitely the most viable fantasy asset for Auburn this year. I had a stat that I posted earlier in the spring that I thought was notable when Peyton Thorne transferred over. When the quarterback has more than 100 rushing attempts in Hugh Freeze's offense, typically, the running back one has only averaged 10.1 fantasy points per game. That's kind of what we were looking at when Robbie Ashford was the perceived, leader in the clubhouse, starting at quarterback. You add in Peyton Thorne, a mobile option, but he's not Robbie Ashford. He's not going to run the ball 150 times. When the quarterback has run the ball less than 100 times in the past under Hugh Freeze, that points per game average for the running back one skyrockets to 15 fantasy points per game. So I think Thorne's addition and him, most likely, we both believe, stepping into that quarterback one position, I think it really boosts Jarquez Hunter's stock, assuming that he's available this season.
Yeah, and there's depth there, right? They brought in Brian Beatty over from South Florida. They have Damari Alston back, who's a sophomore. He played in 12 games last year. So there is some depth there at the running back position. So to your point, even though Hunter may get the lion's share of carries with Thorne at quarterback, there's still a pretty good chance we're going to see some of those other guys get some touches throughout the year as well. And Freeze has done a good job of bringing in so many pieces that he can afford to kind of spread some things out. It is all going to come down to that quarterback position. But for me personally, like I mentioned, it's Jarquez Hunter. If I'm taking outside shots at another player right now, we talked about this in our last best ball draft. Maybe I take some sort of a late flyer for myself on Peyton Thorne at quarterback in a best ball league where maybe I'm looking for a quarterback 4, and it's purely an investment in Hugh Freeze's system.
Yeah, I think my choice, if not Hunter, I think Rivaldo Fairweather. I don't have any shares of his, but he would be the guy that I would kind of look towards. Tremendous athlete transferring over from FIU. And the difficult part of that assessment is you've had 2 kind of scenarios with the tight end one under Hugh Freeze. You've had his Ole Miss offense where it's Evan Ingram, who just had a boatload of targets, boatload of catches. On the flip side, the last 4 years at Liberty, his tight end one, Hugh Freeze's tight end one, only averaged 13 receptions per game. So, is it meet somewhere in the middle? Are you going to get Evan Ingram, or is it just going to be the tight end position going to be a non-factor in the offense? Which also I wanted to bring up, Philip Montgomery, the offensive coordinator, never used the tight end position at Tulsa. So I don't know. That could be two opposite ends of the spectrum potentially with
and that's a good point. Just to put a bow on Auburn, it was a conversation that we had back in the spring. You've got Phil Montgomery coming in. He was the head coach at Tulsa, right? And Hugh Freeze really could get a meld of 2 good offensive systems and play callers here. Really curious to see what we get out of these 2, but I think we're going to get, should be pretty good. Auburn, I think it should be pretty decent on offense and should be at least competitive in the SEC. Whether or not they win many games remains to be seen. Yeah,
I think this is this is an offense to invest in the future, because we like Hugh Freeze's offense. We like Philip Montgomery's offense typically. I don't know if they have the pieces this year outside Jarquez Hunter, but I mean, I think they could fight for a bowl game. I think coming out of the gates. I don't know if you would agree with that or not.
Yeah, I think 6-6 is definitely on the table. Talk about 6-6. What about the Florida Gators? Year 2 of Billy Napier era at Florida. When you look at, they underperformed in regards to Florida standards last year. They're bringing two good backs back, Montrell Johnson, Trevor Etienne. They got Ricky Pearsall back at receiver. The quarterback really is going to be the issue for them, right? They bring in Graham Mertz to transfer. They've got Jack Miller there. For me, this Florida team may only be, and look, we just mentioned the same thing with Florida. I mean, at Auburn. But, this is one of the four teams in the SEC that didn't really have any changing on the offensive, whether, at offensive coordinator. I'm kind of curious to see where you stand on Florida. We had spoken about this earlier in the spring that there were really no fantasy assets really within like the top 50 at any position for Florida, which was surprising to us. If I'm leaning anywhere, I'm going to put a little faith in that Billy Napier system. And I think Montrell Johnson is the name to own if you're going to have one of the Florida Gators. I'm sure you'd probably agree, but where do you stand on your assessment of the Florida offense?
Yeah, I mean, we can skip right over the passing game. They split up the targets amongst receivers. We saw that back in Louisiana. We saw that last year for the most part. Tight end's a non-factor in the system. Graham Mertz is the quarterback. So essentially, we just skip right over the passing game. I thought we were just going to skip right over the running game too. And it's not like I've drafted Montrell Johnson or Trevor Etienne this offseason, but I can make it one argument, in my opinion. I think people avoid it because maybe the offense is just bad in general this year, but people avoid it because we know what Billy Napier typically does with his running backs, in that it's usually a committee, right? And I think it got even more worse. I don't know. In the spring where they brought in Cameron Carroll, the Tulane transfer, and that's a third body now that enters that mix, and because he stood out in the spring too. So I think you could see a three-way split potentially. Here's my argument in favor of potentially drafting either Montrell Johnson or Etienne. You are losing 100 carries and 9 rushing touchdowns with Anthony Richardson gone now, right? So you kind of got to factor that into the equation, because we know Graham Mertz is not going to run the football. So, we've seen it in the past at Louisiana with a Trey Regas, the other Elijah Mitchell. It was about to escape me. Those two guys, we've seen them average, 15, 16, 17 fantasy points per game. Maybe having a non-running quarterback kind of boosts their fantasy stock. I think that's the argument I would make in favor of drafting those two players.
And I'm going to second that argument as well, Mike, because this is the first time in a while that Napier won't have a mobile quarterback, right? When he was producing those two-back systems at Louisiana, he even had Levi Lewis there that was, running the ball as well. And he had Richardson last year. If he goes to Graham Mertz, it's going to be really in the hands of those two running backs. I could even see a best case scenario for Florida where they're really competitive, and offensively, Montrell Johnson and Etienne will be both fantasy options for us somewhere down the line. And as you mentioned, with Cameron Carroll, the third back, I think they're going to ride this running game really heavily this year.
They should. That's where their talent resides. The offensive line is a bit of a question, though. I think just one starter returns. Now, they added 4 transfers. 3 of them were FBS transfers and 2 were SEC transfers. So they did fill those spots, but a lot of turnover on the offensive line. Something to watch.
Now, let's go to Kentucky, where Liam Cohen comes back as offensive coordinator. He was there a couple of years ago, went out to spend a season with McVay's group on McVay's staff with the LA Rams. Comes back to Kentucky. All of a sudden now he's got Devin Leary, quarterback, formerly of NC State, out the transfer portal. They grab Ray Davis, another transfer, at running back. We've got Barry and Brown pegged at wide receiver 1. Tavion Robinson comes back. Dane Key was a serviceable option for them last year as well. They bring in Demi Sumo, the transfer running back from NC State. Like, there's a lot of decent pieces in this Kentucky offense. I think for me, the big question is, one, will we see Devin Leary have that bounce back year? And two, and probably most importantly, are we really going to get that volume vulture, target vulture in that passing game, in that offense this year, as Wan'Dale Robinson was that guy 2 years ago in Cohen's offense? Is Brown or will Robinson have that role this year, or will we see things spread around more so in 2023?
Yeah, just quick on Leary. I do expect a bounce back year, and that's most important to us because we need him to support these talented wide receivers. That does not mean, at least in my opinion, that does not mean he's a viable fantasy option. He is a complete non-runner, and this is not a high volume passing game, right? So you're going to get the 17 to 20 fantasy points per game probably consistently from Devin Leary, just because I do think he's a really good quarterback, have a bounce back year. It just doesn't, it doesn't work for CFF, right? So he's if you're drafting him, it's back end of your roster. The important piece is that he supports these wide receivers. Now, you mentioned it. Liam Cohen's back as offensive coordinator. We all remember 2 years ago with Wan'Dale Robinson in the slot. This system, back he was with the St. Louis Rams, and then his 1 year stint in Kentucky. It's all about the slot receiver typically. Who is it, right? Barian Brown, probably, arguably the most talented receiver on the roster. Spent most of his time outside last year. Now in the spring, he was flexible, right? They moved him both inside and out. I still think with Tavion Robinson back, he's going to be outside. Do they feature their best player, or is this a system play and it's Tavion Robinson because, he spent 71% of his reps in the slot last year? The issue, it was interesting. I was reading up. The issue last year was him and the offensive coordinator they had last year did not get along whatsoever, did not see eye to eye. So can we expect more from Tavion Robinson now that he's with an offensive coordinator that has said that he's excited to work with him, potentially could feature him in this offense? So I think fall camp is going to be really important for us to keep tabs on this wide receiver spot and how the wide receivers are being utilized.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. And just touching on Devin Leary, right? If you're playing in any type of a league, not a bad quarterback 3 or 4 to have. You're probably looking at consistent fantasy points, but is he a 30+ touchdown guy? That's debatable, right? And if you're not mobile, you've got to be up around 3,600 passing yards and 30+ touchdowns to even kind of get consideration for a fantasy roster. When it comes to the receivers, like you mentioned, we've got to pay real close attention to how things are shaken out in preseason camp, but there's no doubt that one, if not both of those receivers will be some viable options. And then I think the one thing that's really true right now with Kentucky and why I think Ray Davis is the safest option right now is I think, we know we're going to get a steady dose of Ray Davis in that running back 1 spot. They do have some depth now with Demi Sumo there. I think he's more of a play for next year. I think it's Ray Davis's job at RB1. And, I haven't yet invested any draft capital in Ray Davis for the 2023 season, but if he's there on the board and the value's there, I think he's the player for the money right now that I'm looking at on that Kentucky roster.
100% agree. Yeah, Ray Davis, in my opinion, I don't have any hard hitting analysis for that. He just feels like a perfect, just plug and play, probably give you equal production to Chris Rodriguez last year. And then totally agree. Demi Sumo comes over from NC State. His numbers were off the charts, limited touches last year at NC State because that's just what they do. But he was an explosive player, and I think he is a top tier dynasty candidate that you want on your roster for next year when Ray Davis graduates.
Now over to Mississippi State, Mike, where obviously, unfortunately, the Mike Leach era, comes to an end, and Mississippi State transfers over to Zach Arnett, promoting their defensive coordinator to head coach. In turn, Arnett reaches out to Kevin Barbay, who was the Appalachian State offensive coordinator. he comes over to take over. He comes now in to take over the offense. Will Rogers is back. They bring in transfer Mike Wright, quarterback from Vanderbilt. You would imagine it's still Will Rogers' job to lose, where this roster was really stacked at receiver. They still have a number of receivers coming back, but the point of interest from a fantasy standpoint in this offense this year now all of a sudden shifts to running back and Jaquavius Marks, who I think you and I both agree right now, if we were singling one player out on this Mississippi State roster to have on our fantasy roster, we kind of start with Jaquavius Marks at running back, right?
Easily. Very easily. Will Rogers is the same conversation kind of with Devin Leary. I mean, you look at our projections and Will Rogers I think we have him like 25, 26 touchdowns, 8 or 9 interceptions, 3,000 passing yards, which is on the surface a really good season, but he's given you nothing on the ground. And this offense is going to average, I think, 19 pass attempts per game less than what they were doing under Leach. So you're just cutting down the passing attempts dramatically. And he's a non-runner. So I don't know. Will Rogers goes from a top 20 quarterback previously, in my opinion, to close to undraftable at this point. Doesn't mean he's a bad player. Doesn't mean he can't have a decent statistical season. It's just not, a style of quarterback that's going to give you a ton of fantasy points. With regards to Marks, I don't know. I'm curious to hear what you think, because you have two trains of thought here when looking at Barbay. You go back 2 years ago, you have Lou Nichols, 339 carries. Offensive coordinator last year at Appalachian State, they split it up between the top two running backs. So, we don't have a long history or track record with Barbay calling plays. So you're kind of taking a chance there in regards to the kind of, statistical season that Jaquavius Marks would have. I would say this, and I was thinking about it the other day. You like this too, just thinking hypothetically in the storylines. Look, Jaquavius Marks, he's a program leader. They're sending him to SEC media days. He's been with the program for 4 years, 3 or 4 years at this point. Never really been able to showcase his running ability because of the system that Mike Leach ran. Do you think maybe the program does him a solid and tries to get him on NFL draft radar, and kind of featuring him in this offense? I think it's something that possibly could happen.
I think it's an interesting point to make, but there are two things that I'm concerned about. One, whenever you go from a system like even when Leach transitioned when he came over to Mississippi State, it takes a year to rebuild that roster, just given the personnel changes that takes to run the offense. You're now going away from that offense where the roster was built towards, and now you're transitioning to a different offense. And so I do think it's going to take a little bit of time to transition. And I say that to my second point is I'm not so I almost feel like Mississippi State may be the worst team in the SEC West. And I mean, you look, you got Bama there, you've got Arkansas, you've got Ole Miss, right? You've got an improved Auburn now, we think. I mean, who else in that division could you say is going to be worse than Mississippi State right now? And so my question is, are we really going to get Marks featured a lot if their offense struggles and they are playing a lot from behind this year? That's my concern with Marks, is just the long-term investment and whether or not he's going to get those late third quarter, early fourth quarter carries, because Mississippi State, I don't know if they're going to be playing from ahead in too many games this year. That's my concern.
I would push back just slightly in that we know for damn sure that Jaquavius Marks knows how to catch the football, right? So if you're in those PPR formats, I was looking it up right now. Lou Nichols had 40 receptions on 49 targets 2 years ago. So this is a system that will get their running backs involved in the passing game, and we obviously know that Jo'quavious Marks is adept in that, or he has that skill set in his game. So I think you could get some additional PPR points if you know they're not, Mississippi State's not good as you kind of believe them to be, and you know. Maybe
that's a good point. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think you bring up a very valid point there, where there's a history of that running back one getting the catches. Just not for me. I don't have the confidence in that. I'm not willing to roll the dice there. I'm not saying that I wouldn't look at him maybe, but I think a guy like that, somebody's going to take a chance with him on draft day, and you roll the dice and see what happens. For me, just I'm going to play the percentages on this one and pass in this transition year with Marks.
Yeah, I don't have any shares of his either. Could be a mistake, obviously, if they feed him 300 times like they did, or Barbay did Lou Nichols. I would say this too, on the surface, there's no really recognizable names behind Jo'quavious Marks. They are confident, though. It appears, with the depth that they have. Simeon Price kind of popped late last year. He played well in the bowl game against Illinois last year. They brought in a top JUCO transfer in Jeffrey Pittman, and they did add Kayvon Lee from Penn State. So they do have depth behind Jo'quavious Marks. So it'll be fascinating, in my opinion, to see how they utilize Jo'quavious Marks this year.
And just to put a bow on Mississippi State, just to give one or two names in that passing game, Justin Robinson, we have pegged. He's the former Georgia receiver. We've got him right now in that wide receiver one role. There's nothing about the Mississippi State passing game that's appealing to me, but right now, Justin Robinson stands out to both you and I right now as the wide receiver one. But, to your point, you've got to keep an eye on some of these preseason camps, because we are getting a new offense, and you never know how that coordinator comes in there, and you don't know if certain players play well in certain systems. You got Jaden Walley back. We know he was an important part of that Mississippi State offense as well. So still some names to put on the radar in the passing game.
Yeah, just real quick, I think we should mention that Seydou Traore, the former Arkansas State tight end, did end up transferring to Mississippi State. I think it's, just reading up, I think it's unlikely that he's eligible this year, just because he transferred and to Colorado and transferred again in the same offseason. So I don't think he's going to have eligibility. Sounds like he's going to move to receiver. Does Fantrax, if he's eligible, is he still a tight end on Fantrax with his designation? Do they move him to receiver? Because he is moving to receiver with Mississippi State. So just another storyline to keep tabs on for
there you
the
go. Mike finding those Fantrax loopholes.
They
All
could be
man.
league winners. CJ Donaldson.
I'm with you. All right, let's go over to Missouri, where we start at the quarterback spot because Brady Cook returns. He was injured last year. We'll give him a mulligan, but he wasn't great. They bring in Jake Garcia from Miami, the transfer. But when you're looking at this offense from Missouri, traditionally, all eyes kind of start and stop at that running back spot, Mike. And we had trouble with this last year. And this was one of those systems where it was like, man, we have to find that guy, because this system really is tailored towards a running back one in fantasy and can really turn out some fantasy points. Well, we were kind of spot on last year, because Missouri never did figure out that running back spot. We couldn't figure it out, and because they never could figure it out. There's not a lot of change there. Cody Schrader's still coming back. Nathaniel Pete, who had transferred from Stanford 2 years ago, he's back as well at that running back spot. We still have some questions in that running game for Missouri. And you still got some receivers. Luther Burden, playmaker at receiver. They're moving him in the slot to try to get him the ball a little bit more, into his hands, into space. They bring over Theo Weiss, the transfer receiver. There are some options in this Missouri offense. Do you favor one over the other right now? Because that's where I'm at in this Missouri offense. I look at the names on this depth chart, and I'm not sure I like one any more than another right now.
Yeah, we disagree, I think, on Missouri, me and you. I don't think you're a huge Luther Burden guy, where I think the offensive coordinator change to Kirby Moore, former Fresno State offensive coordinator, I think this is going to help him. He moved to the slot during the spring, and it's a really, really easy comparison, in my opinion, to Jalen Cropper in his first few years with Fresno State, because Jalen Cropper played in the slot. In those 2 seasons, 2020 and 2021, where Jalen Cropper was in the slot, averaged 17 fantasy points per game. And he had one of those seasons was a 100 target season, and it would have been 2 had 2020 actually been played 12 games, and obviously that was shortened because of COVID. So he would have had 2 100 target seasons playing in the slot under Kirby Moore. So that just fits to me, right? They want to move Luther Burden to the slot. I guarantee you that Kirby Moore sees a lot of Luther Burden, and just kind of how, maybe he can replicate that success that Jalen Cropper had at that position. I think the one thing that works against him is Jalen Cropper averaged maybe 10, 11 yards per catch inside in the slot. So while high volume, he's not going to kind of break those, or they're not going to target him deep per se, right? So he's probably going to have a low yards per catch total. I believe you are definitely higher on the running back situation, correct?
Yeah, I am. This is where I'm at with Missouri. It's really tough. First of all, I'll start at quarterback. I'll give you my whole rundown of Missouri. I think Brady Cook's going to hold on to that job, even though they're bringing in Jake Garcia. I think he was hurt last year. I think he's got something to prove. I would not be surprised if Brady Cook starts out as the starting quarterback. I'm afraid to invest any draft capital into these guys because I'm more worried about how Missouri is going to perform on a whole and whether or not these guys get looks and rotated out there at some point during the year. So I'm worried about that.
Well, can I interject real quick?
Go ahead.
Today was SEC Media Days, and Eli Drinkwitz did speak on that. And so he said that Brady Cook is going to get the first look in fall camp. And I would agree with you. He's going to start the first game, but he did say today that both Jake Garcia, it's going to be tough for Brady Cook to hold off both Jake Garcia and Sam Horn, the prize redshirt freshman recruit from 2 years ago. He said that it's possible that they could use multiple quarterbacks in those first 2 games to start the year. I would guess, if he's saying that, I don't have the schedule up right now, but I would guess they're playing, cupcakes in those first 2 weeks. But we could see multiple quarterbacks, and I think it would be likely that we're going to see multiple quarterbacks in those first 2 games. But I agree with you. Brady Cook is going to start the season as QB1.
May as well send me to media days, Mike. I've got it covered for you right here, right? So and so here's where I'm at with running back. I wonder last year if Nathaniel Pete doesn't fumble that game against Auburn, if he sticks as the every down starter. Now, it would have taken a few games to get to that point. My concern is that Cody Schrader's a little bit of a grinder. I think the staff really loves him. He does all the right things, puts in the work. And so same thing with Cook. I think I wouldn't be surprised to see Schrader get the nod to start the year, but I wouldn't even be surprised to see Nathaniel Pete take over as the starter at some point during the year. So there's my assessment at the running back spot. Luther Burden, I made this assessment last year. I was worried about drafting him because I thought that Missouri was going to have to get creative to get the ball in his hands in a number of different ways, which they did that earlier in the year. They couldn't do it as the year wore on. They're going to have to do that again. I know he's moving inside to get him more touches. I just don't know if he is the he's a great talent, but from a fantasy standpoint, I don't think he's the receiver that some people thought he was going to be from a fantasy standpoint when he came in as a freshman. I still have those same concerns. I think he's going to be a good receiver and possibly better prospect, but my job is to evaluate college fantasy football talent, and I just don't see that high level. I question whether or not I still even have him overvalued in the 20s as a college fantasy football asset and receiver. That's my rundown on Missouri, and that's why I'm nervous. If I had to roll the dice somewhere with Missouri this year, I'd rather roll the dice handcuffing the running backs than I would any other position on this team right now.
Yeah, I think you would agree with this too. I think you would have more interest just because of the kind of the stats I brought up, right? We should expect 100 targets this year for Luther Burden. Full point PPR formats, I think, would be best suited to draft Luther Burden or to prioritize him. Like this, a part of the issue last year was we didn't realize how good Dominic Lovett is. And I can say,
but the spring reports were there talking about Lovett, and there were people overlooking that.
Yeah, we just had, googly eye for Luther Burden and the 5-star talent. I can say with certainty that Theo Weiss is not going to take targets away from Luther Burden this year. So I think that works in his favor. Running backs, just for me personally, the coaches are really hyping up Cody Schrader. The running back coach, I think, came out and said that he's expecting 1,000-yard season from Cody Schrader. Maybe he gets the touches. I mean, he was averaging 19 touches per game, I believe, over the last 6 weeks or so. Is he any good? He was only averaging 3.7 yards per carry in that stretch. And then if you're using a advanced metric from Pro Football Focus, Nathaniel Pete's breakaway percentage on his carries was nearly double that of Cody Schrader. So maybe he sees the touches and he just kind of finds his way to fantasy relevance. I just don't know that he's that good of a running back, in my opinion. But as you know, in college fantasy, you get the volume and you can produce stats even if you're not that good of a player. So we'll see on the running backs there.
Well, look, they're going to open up the year with South Dakota and Middle Tennessee. So the opportunity to run the ball is certainly going to be there. Kansas State, then Memphis and Vanderbilt. Then they really get into the heart of the schedule where they go LSU, Kentucky, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, Arkansas. So I would debate that the best time to invest in Missouri is going to be the first half of the year. And you've got to really kind of be on point to know who that guy is.
Yeah. I mean, hey, I would start Cody Schrader in those. The way that they're talking about him, I would start him those first 2 weeks and feel comfortable about it because of those matchups.
So let's go over to Ole Miss, Mike, and we're obviously going to get to the quarterback position. So let's just kind of touch on the running backs real quick because Quinshaw Judkins, we've got him as our number one running back in the preseason fantasy draft guide. No reason to kind of go off of that. He, for me, it's either him or Rasheen Ali, and we've given Judkins the nod. It's debatable. They've got depth there. Ulysses Bentley's back. Last year, Zach Evans was there. They've got Bentley back. So you're going to have that 1-2 punch, right? They bring in Trey Harris, the transfer receiver from Louisiana Tech. You've got Jordan Watkins back. They bring in Cade Prescorn, the tight end from Memphis. They still have Michael Trigg. There are a lot of options in this Ole Miss
Zachary
offense.
Franklin. Yep.
What's that?
Zachary Franklin.
Zachary Franklin. That's correct.
Yep.
That's right. I forgot about Zachary Franklin from UTSA. So number of names that they've brought in here. But it's all going to come down to that quarterback spot. And right now, it's hard for us to say where Lane Kiffin is going to land on a starter right now. I think really that's the problem for us from a fantasy standpoint is, do we really want to invest in the Ole Miss quarterback because it could be a swing or miss? Where do you stand on Ole Miss quarterback right now?
Yeah, I kind of wish we did this podcast after we heard Lane Kiffin talk at SEC Media Days. I don't know. Maybe he gives us a sound bite. Well, he would give us a sound bite given that it's Lane Kiffin. But I'd be curious to hear what he says even further about the quarterback position if he gave us anything. But I do think it's a draftable spot, right? In terms of you want Jackson Dart and Spencer Sanders if you're going to be drafting the Ole Miss quarterback because it's been a profitable position. 28 fantasy points per game. The Ole Miss quarterback won under Lane Kiffin the last few years. So it's been a fantasy relevant position. I think you have to stack both at this point, even though I am in the boat that it's going to be Jackson Dart this year. But I still have that little, that little tingling in your ear that Spencer Sanders is lurking. And so I think it's best practices that you still stack that position. And let's be honest, you can get them both beyond round 15. So you are not paying a hefty price to get them. I would say this with the quarterback. I already know it. We disagree on this one. You listen to the beat writers, and they would consistently tell you, me and you agreed on this, right? Spencer Sanders looked like the better quarterback, in our opinion, in the spring game. There were 15 spring practices, and they said that Jackson Dart was head and shoulders above the rest of the group with just how he performed. So, you just kind of take it for what it's worth, and that consistently wise, it was Jackson Dart as the best quarterback in that room over the course of 15 or 16 practices.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, it's Quinshaw Judkins, and that's it. That's all I'm really interested in Ole Miss. If I was advising anyone else at the quarterback spot for Ole Miss, this is the way that I think it's going to shake out. I could see Dart starting the season, but I also can see a situation where maybe Lane Kiffin has enough, he's got enough firepower there at quarterback where he can rotate and play a hot hand, because you look, when Ole Miss's schedule gets to week 4, 5, 6, they got Alabama, LSU, Arkansas back to back to back, and then a bye week. There's 4 weeks there where you may get some inconsistent fantasy production from that Ole Miss quarterback spot. And I just wonder if we're going to get to a situation where, hey, maybe we see both of these guys throughout the year, and we get into a situation where they ride out the hot hand, because we've got Judkins, you've got Bentley, who's going to be a serviceable running back too. You've got Trey Harris, you've got Zachary Franklin, Jordan Watkins, two viable tight ends. Like, there are going to be targets to get the ball to. They've got to have a quarterback that can get it into their hands and deliver it on time. And for me, that's what it's going to come down to. I don't like that uncertainty of the quarterback spot right now, but for as much as I dislike that, I love having Quinshaw Judkins. He's just a wrecking ball at the running back spot.
Well, and I think that just speaks to the point that if you want a piece of the Ole Miss quarterbacks, you got to stack them, right? You have to draft both of them at this point. I wanted to bring up one stat. Bear with me here, because I'm going to read it so I don't flub it. People have made the argument, and we talked about this when we were doing projections, right? Jackson Dart had 128 carries last season, 1 touchdown, right? And so people are thinking, hey, you have that many carries, but only 1 touchdown, that should, improve to the mean, or however you want to say it, right? You should have 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns with that many carries. Of those 128 carries for Jackson Dart, only 15 came in the red zone. That's 12%, right? I compared it to 2 years ago with Matt Corral, had 152 carries for that season with 11 rushing touchdowns. He had 41 carries in the red zone, which was 27%. So a far higher rate of red zone carries for Matt Corral, and that's why it ended up in double-digit rushing touchdowns, where only 12% of Jackson Dart's carries came in the red zone too. So I think that explains why we only saw 1 rushing touchdown from Jackson Dart. Do we expect there to be more than 1 rushing touchdown for Jackson Dart this year, assuming he gets all 12 games? Yes. But I think that explains to you why we didn't see the high number of rushing touchdowns from Dart last year.
Zachary Franklin, one of the latest, probably one of the last big names that when everybody went into the transfer portal following spring, was the last to commit. He lands at Ole Miss. If you're investing in the Ole Miss receivers, he's the one for you right now to target. For me, he is, as far as receiver.
Yeah, if I had to choose one, it would be him, but I haven't drafted a Ole Miss receiver. It sucks because you had a top 5, top 10 receiver in Zachary Franklin. We both loved Trey Harris last year at Louisiana Tech, and these guys just same thing with Ulysses Bentley, right? He was I know we had differences of opinion on Ulysses Bentley at SMU, but that was a top 40 running back in college fantasy, and now he's sitting in the college fantasy abyss at this point. So I don't know. I view the wide receiver position similarly to last year. I think it's fine with if you compare it to Jonathan Mingo and Malik Heath, but they're not going to be anything that you need to prioritize in your fantasy drafts.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about this, how Zachary Franklin leaving UTSA, going to Ole Miss. Basically, he would have been a top 10 easy wide receiver in fantasy this year. Him going to Ole Miss, now all of a sudden he's outside, I think, the top 30. And Trey Harris, you could probably debate, he'd have been a top 25, 30 receiver going into this season over at Louisiana Tech had he stayed. And now, he's probably not even in the top 50, 60 for us. So
that's the benefit of you not doing those early fantasy drafts in February and March, because the Zachary Franklin owners who are drafting him in the first round are hurting right now. So,
yep. Well, let's go to South Carolina, Mike, where Spencer Rattler comes back at quarterback. Antwain Wells, one of probably a top 20 to 30 fantasy receiver this year, depending on whose rankings you're looking at. There's some pieces that, obviously they lose running back Marshawn Lloyd out as a transfer to USC. They got the Carrion Joyner coming back. Amarine Brown at receiver, Eddie Lewis there. I think he's is that the former Memphis wide receiver?
Yep.
So we got him there. You've got Trey Knox at tight end. Joshua Simons there as well. So there are some pieces here at that South Carolina offense. They lose their coordinator who went over to Nebraska. So they do, starting out with Dowell Loggins at offensive coordinator. He was the Arkansas tight ends coach last year under Kendall Briles. He comes over to lead the offense. I have to be honest with you, Mike, I don't have any investment in the South Carolina offense this year in any of the drafts we've done. I do like Antwain Wells of all the players on the South Carolina roster. The problem is I think others just value him a lot higher than I do. So I don't think I'm ever going to have any shares of him this year. I'm not as high on Wells from a fantasy standpoint as others are right now. So for me, it's been kind of a miss for South Carolina players in these best ball drafts.
Same with me. And this was something we talked about before doing projections. Like South Carolina, it's really tough when you got these. Dowell Loggins was a positional coach with Arkansas, but then he spent all that time as an offensive coordinator with in the NFL. I think with the Dolphins, Jets, and Bears, and it's just. If you're a system person, it's really tough to get a gauge on what, this offensive coordinator likes to call, because, he's been a position coach and then he was coaching in the NFL, which is different than the college game, obviously. So tough to know it was tough to project South Carolina this season. I would agree. Antwain Wells is the priority of anybody. But similar to you, I'm not prioritizing him the way others are doing in these drafts. Could be a mistake. It was noticeable to me when doing a little bit of research. His ADOT last year, average depth of target, was only 8.9 yards. And if you look back at his time, the couple of years at James Madison, that was up at around 12 yards. So do we see this offense evolve, maybe take some more deep shots with Antwain Wells, which would obviously lead to or hopefully more fantasy production if Spencer Rattler can complete those downfield passes. So if that improves, I think maybe we're missing out here on Antwain Wells, but he's really the only person for me personally with that I see being fantasy relevant on the South Carolina offense this year.
I agree. Let's go to Texas A&M, Mike, where, down year for the Aggies last year, could be a bounce back year. Connor Weigman coming back at quarterback. He's still got Max Johnson there. So a couple of options, but you and I both, feel like Weigman is the guy. Got Reuben Owens, the freshman running back, coming in. You and I already have him penciled in as the starter this year. I just think he's too talented. He'll win out that. Evan Stewart at wide receiver 1. Aeneas Smith coming back this year at wide receiver 2. You've got Moose Muhammad. Like, they have some good receivers there. Donovan Green, I think, is going to be a pretty decent tight end as well. There are some pieces back for Texas A&M. I am expecting them to have a bounce back year. I think they're going to be a really good program this year, but from a fantasy standpoint, that's where I really struggle. I can see where they're going to spread the ball around in the passing game, and if I'm willing to roll the dice, it's just my philosophy. I'm sort of one of those go big or go home on draft days. I'm willing to take a chance on that running back one. Give me Reuben Owens, and I'm going to go all in on him and take my chances as opposed to spreading things around. Now, I know there are some others, friend of the site, Greg Brandt. One thing that we've noticed, he's been really high on Evan Stewart in some of the drafts that we've done. I know he's high on him. So there's some talent in this A&M offense. For me, I think I'm willing to roll the dice on Reuben Owens at running back this year.
That's the player that I have the most shares of is Reuben Owens, and it's the price, right? Because you can get him beyond round 25 in drafts. So I'm drafting him based upon the price, but you kind of look back at Petrino's track record over the years, he tends to split it up. What I think works in his favor, we both watched that spring game, and he didn't look any different than Le'Veon Moss or Amari Daniels. So I expect if there's no separation between those guys, I expect the 5-star true freshman to eventually take that starting job over, as he improves as the season goes along. So I'm with you, Reuben Owens, in that backfield. Evan Stewart's an interesting discussion, I think, because it's a talent versus fantasy production argument. Bobby Petrino's never had a wide receiver in the last 9 years with with double-digit touchdowns. And you would agree that wide receiver room is loaded, obviously, with Aniyah Smith back, Moose Muhammad. They really hyped up Noah Thomas, a sophomore receiver. And I think there's a reason that Tyron Smith went back to UTEP, right? He probably saw the writing on the wall that room was full. So I question. There's no doubting the 5-star talent of Evan Stewart. It's just a matter of how many targets he's going to get. And again, it's kind of similar to running back. They kind of spread it around a little bit in that passing game when looking back over the years at Bobby Petrino calling plays. So Reuben Owens for me is the target based on his price. And same with kind of Antoine Wells, that I'm just willing to kind of let other people kind of prioritize and draft Evan Stewart. Hopefully that doesn't come back to bite us.
Well, I think A&M, when I'm looking at it, every once in a while, it's nice to pull up the schedule. And the one thing I do like about A&M is the schedule. 2 of the first 3 weeks, New Mexico, Louisiana, Monroe. They got a game at Miami sandwiched in between that. Then they get Auburn, the first game of the S. So nothing really daunting. And then they avoid Kentucky, Florida, and Georgia from the eastern side of the SEC. So they don't get any of those SEC East teams. So I think the schedule really shakes out well for Texas A&M this year, not only from, winning games, but from a fantasy standpoint. That's 3 decent defenses over in the SEC East that they're not going to play this year.
Yeah, and then just kind of looking at the schedule too, New Mexico and Louisiana Monroe in the non-conference, and then you get that typical SEC Week 12 cupcake, which is in your semifinals of the CFF playoffs. And if you think that maybe Texas A&M is kind of fighting for a bowl game this year, they're going to have to play their studs. Again, they're playing Abilene Christian, so they're probably not going to play 4 quarters, but they might have to win that game, and you're probably going to utilize a freshman like Reuben Owens a lot in that game. So I think you could still get good fantasy production in that matchup too. So I would agree with you. The schedule sets up nicely for them this year.
Yep. Well, let's go over to the SEC East and talk Vanderbilt. I'm expecting Vanderbilt to be decent this year, at least offensively. AJ Swan has experience under his belt. Ken Seals is back as well. So they've at least got a little depth at quarterback. You've got Will Shepard back, who is a very underrated receiver, fantasy-wise. Jaden McGowan, who you and I were looking at as sort of a surprise last year as a freshman, and he made some plays. He's back. Quincy Skinner's back in that wide receiver 3 role. The questions really abound more so at running back, just because there's not a proven commodity there at running back, but there is a chance that there's some production that comes out of there. But if I'm looking at Vanderbilt's roster as a whole, Mike, and we're talking college fantasy football, for me, it kind of starts right at the top at Will Shepherd at that wide receiver 1 spot. To me, he may not have that elite level ceiling, but I feel like when you look at him from a receiver standpoint in the SEC, he's got that high floor and really is maybe a safe option as a wide receiver 3, or maybe even a wide receiver 2, depending on the format of your league. But for me, Will Shepherd, I spotlight him as sort of the guy that I would target off of the Vanderbilt roster.
Schedule is important with Will Shepherd, in my opinion. The downside, 2 bye weeks for Vanderbilt this year. If you look at the non-conference, though, is relatively favorable, or it is favorable. Hawaii, Alabama A&M, UNLV, and then at Wake Forest, which we expect Vanderbilt to be competitive in that matchup. So probably some good production from Will Shepherd in that matchup as well. I would say this: if you look back to last year, non-conference for Will Shepherd, 22 fantasy points per game. Gets into SEC play, 9.6 fantasy points per game. Good in the sense that you know when to start Will Shepherd, but bad because he was practically non-usable once Vanderbilt got into SEC play. Does that improve? Remains to be seen, right? But I think that's the downside potentially with Will Shepherd, is that you're facing the better teams in the SEC, and then it becomes irrelevant on your fantasy roster. So I don't have any shares of Will Shepherd to this point.
I think it's a good point. It's going to come down to a value, come down the price. The one thing I will say in his defense is Vanderbilt was a little bit wishy-washy at quarterback last year, and hopefully AJ Swan settles in, becomes a little bit more reliable. Mike Wright is gone, who was more of a mobile threat. So we might see a few more targets coming Shepherd's way with Swan at quarterback.
No doubt. I would say the other one just to watch, probably more long-term, or definitely more long-term, Cedric Alexander, the incoming true freshman, already 200 pounds, and looks to be the odds-on favorite to start. You have an offensive coordinator in Joey Lynch, who we've already seen feature Ramon Davis. You go back to his time at Ball State, he had feature running backs, James Gilbert, Caleb Huntley. So if we show signs as a true freshman, I think that's going to be a valuable asset in the future years.
Staying within the state of Tennessee, the Volunteers lose offensive coordinator, but they promote Joey Hazel from quarterbacks coach. But as you and I talked before the show, it doesn't really matter. This is Josh Heupel's offense. And when you look at that Tennessee offense, we're going to get Joe Milton running the show there at quarterback. The receivers are stacked. We'll get into that conversation with them. You get Squirrel White, Brew McCoy, Dante Thornton that came over from Oregon. Ramel Keaton is back as well. So you've got options there in the passing game. You've got the 2-headed running back monster 1-2 punch of Jabari Small and Jalen Wright. Where do you want to start with Tennessee? I feel like Joe Milton's the easy conversation. He pegged starting quarterback. He's going to be the quarterback this year for them unless things just completely fall apart. The fantasy questions really start piling up when we're talking about running back and receiver for me.
I would say running back, we probably don't have to have a huge conversation about, just because you're getting everybody back.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see a high upside with any of those players unless somebody gets injured, right? Jabari Small, Jalen Wright, they even like Dylan Sampson back there too. So I think they're going to split it actually 3 ways in that backfield. So unless somebody gets injured, it's going to be a really productive running game as a whole for Tennessee, but just they're going to split it up 3 ways, I think. And I'm not drafting anybody from that group.
I think at running back for me, I know I was higher on Jabari Small than I was Jalen Wright. Very rarely do I do this, Mike. Very rarely do I do this, but I think I've let some of the results of the drafts that I've been in sway me to drop Jabari Small down the ladder a little bit, drop him down a few rungs in my rankings, just because he's been out there a lot longer than I had originally had him ranked. If he ends up being the better of the 2 fantasy assets, then I'll say I made a mistake. I should have stuck with my gut. I've got them a little bit closer together now. And that does feel right. I think you're going to really see a nice split between the two. You've got a third option as well. But I think as long as Tennessee is efficient and effective with Milton at quarterback, they're going to move the ball. They're going to score points. And I think you're going to find both guys find a way to rack up some yards and score touchdowns.
Oh, yeah. They combined for 23 touchdowns between the two last year. So here's the problem with at least speaking to Jabari Small. He had 13 touchdowns last year. He only averaged 11 carries per game, and he only averaged 13 fantasy points per game. He's not going to get high volume of rushing attempts in a game, and Tennessee running backs in the Josh Heupel system not utilized in the passing game. So I think that really it's just not it works against them, right? You're not featured in the passing game, possibly a 2 to 3 way split in the backfield. I just don't see it any upside, I guess, with those.
No, I get it. And 2 of his touchdowns, he did catch 12 passes, and 2 of those happened to go for touchdowns, which was a high conversion rate, considering that Jalen Wright only caught 2 passes out of the backfield all year last year.
Yeah. So, where do you want to go next?
Receiver.
Receiver.
Yeah.
Right. Where are you? I looked at your rankings and I was surprised. I thought you were a Brew McCoy guy, and I'm pretty sure I saw Dante Thornton ranked ahead of Brew McCoy.
Yeah, I've got him really close. Here's for me, I feel that McCoy, I wonder if he can kind of step into that role we were going to see for Cedric Tillman last year till Tillman got hurt. I know a lot of people are high on Squirrel White. I'm just not under the impression that he's the next Jalen Hyatt. I could be wrong, but I don't see anywhere near that. I can see this really being a mixed bag at receiver. I have a hard time this year thinking that one is just going to be way more statistically significant than another. I feel Brew McCoy is a really safe option with a high floor of every receiver on the roster. Squirrel White, to me, has the higher upside. And I think the bigger question comes into, is the talent of Dante Thornton, the transfer from Oregon, going to win out over a guy like Ramel Keaton, who's been in the system for a little bit and has performed, decent at times in the system? For me, I'm more concerned about hitting that wide receiver 3, because I think that this is an offense where there are going to be 3 receivers on fantasy rosters throughout the year. I think Tennessee is going to spread it around in the passing game like that this year.
Yeah, I'm starting to agree with you at this point. I think they're going to use 4 wide receiver sets, right? Just because of that talent at receiver with Keaton, Thornton, Brew McCoy, and Squirrel White. Yeah, just kind of reading up and listening to podcasts and such. I do think I think we're going to see more disbursement of the targets between those 4 players. The issue for me, the conundrum with me, is the upside, right? Because we've seen Jalen Hyatt last year. We saw 3 years ago, with Marlon Williams at UCF. These guys were top 10 fantasy receivers, right? So there's the potential, if one of these guys stands out above the rest, that they could be a top 10, top 5 college fantasy receiver. So I think Squirrel White's the best talent of the bunch, but Brew McCoy's solid. You keep and reading stuff about Dante Thornton. You think 6'5", he's going to be playing at that outside receiver spot, but they're thinking about moving him around, maybe shifting him inside to kind of play that Jalen Hyatt role, because he has that size and speed combination. So, yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards you at this point, that we're going to see a kind of a disbursement of target amongst the top 4 there.
I don't think I would have made this statement a year ago, but seeing Joe Milton in that bowl game, and knowing the magic that Heupel works with those quarterbacks, I look at this roster and I'm like, man, Jabari Small, Jalen Wright at running back, Squirrel Wright, Brew McCoy, Thornton, Keaton, Milton. Tennessee is going to score, I think, almost just as many points this year as they did last year. But what I think we may see more of this year as opposed to last year, we may see a different guy lead the team in receiving we may have a different receiver every week in this Tennessee offense, a different leading receiver.
Yeah.
At least that's my thought this year.
Yeah, and that's fine for best ball, and you probably want to stack them in best ball in that scenario. It's going to make it really tough if it plays out like that in redraft.
For sure.
Kind of drafting these Tennessee receivers. You're not making me feel better about having 0 Joe Milton shares, though. Just talking about the talent that Tennessee has on offense and the potential that they have to score, 35, 40 points this season on a per game basis.
Yep. Let's go over to LSU, Mike. Jaden Daniels comes back. Garrett Nussmeier still in that quarterback room. There were concerns that he would head out with Jaden Daniels coming back, but he's going to stick it out and hopefully, take over next year. Logan Diggs comes in from the Notre Dame to transfer. We have him right now pegged in that top spot at running back. Originally, we had Josh Williams there, but make no mistake about it, there is depth at the running back spot once again for LSU. Malik Neighbors cemented in that wide receiver 1 role for us. But look, LSU's deep too, man. They've got Brian Thomas back. They've got some depth there at receiver. Mason Taylor, who I'm really high on at tight end this year. I love the way that Denbrock features the tight end in this offense. Like, to me, there's a lot to like about LSU. I'll say it right here. I think they're going to be in the national title chase this year. Under Brian Kelly, I think LSU is going to be really good from a fantasy standpoint. I'm finding it really, really hard to peg and lean on one guy. If I had to, I love what Jaden Daniels did last year from a dual threat ability. He would probably be the one guy that I would target, but the way that the drafts have shaken out, the price just hasn't been right for me. I don't have any shares of LSU's offense. From a fantasy standpoint, I'm comfortable with that. I think they're going to be a really good team. I just don't have any shares of fantasy right now. Where do you stand with LSU? Because I'm having trouble at that running back spot. I think that those running backs are really, somebody's going to have a big year. I was on it with Josh Williams, Logan Diggs in there. Complicates it for me, Mike. I'm going to tell you, every best ball draft, I take that back. I have Mason Taylor in 2 drafts. Right now, he's the one guy that I'm targeting that I feel most comfortable about from a fantasy standpoint. But where do you stand?
I'm kind of with you. I don't have a lot of shares of this offense. I don't have any shares of Mason Taylor either, which is I think a mistake at this point. So I should probably boost him a little bit in my rankings. But yeah, running back is weird. Like it should be a dominant running game, right? This is offensive line brings back all
Kane is back. Yeah.
They bring back all 5 starters. And they were number 1 in line yards created last year. So you just have to think that they're going to be even better than they were a year ago. So many mouths to feed in that running back room. Josh Williams back. You add Logan Diggs to the room. Who knows what's happening with John Emery at this point? Noah Kane, obviously. Yep. But I feel confident in saying that I think Logan Diggs is the best back of the group. And while he may not start week 1, he's probably going to be, I would think he's going to end up as the lead back as the season goes along. That's just my opinion there. So if you're drafting him, it's probably a long-term play at the running back position. I don't know. Malik Neighbors, where are you at with him? I kind of struggle with his fantasy evaluation.
Well, look, he was 1,000-yard receiver last year, only caught 3 touchdowns, but he did. He had he averaged 14 yards per catch. I think there's a lot of hype for Malik Neighbors just because of how he performed at the end of the year. He went over 125 3 of the last 4 games. And, one of those was against Georgia. You could argue, whether or not it was mop-up time in the SEC title game against a bad Purdue team that basically everybody left. They didn't have coaching staff there. And one of those was against UAB. I can make a case that those numbers were skewed, but I still think he's going to be a really good wide receiver 1. I think this offense is going to be really good. And let's be honest, the running game is going to be so dominant that there are going to be open receivers in this offense, and he's probably going to be the top target. I think he's definitely worth a fantasy investment. I don't have any shares, but I can definitely make a case to see where I could end up with Malik Neighbors on one of my rosters before we're done draft season.
Same argument, I believe, with Neighbors as we just spoke about with Evan Stewart. Talent is top 10 receiver in college football this year. On the other hand, you look at offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock. Last 6 years, his wide receiver one has not hit 100 targets. Malik Neighbors hit 100 targets, but he needed 14 games to do it. So in the regular season, that hasn't happened. Only averaged 13 fantasy points per game and did not have double-digit touchdowns in a regular season. So it's tough. Are the opportunities going to be there for Malik Neighbors to be a top 10, top 15 receiver in college fantasy football? We know he's a top 10 wide receiver talent-wise, but I don't know if the opportunities are going to be there from a fantasy aspect.
Yeah, there's something about Mason Taylor, true freshman last year, 38 catches, 414 and 3 touchdowns, 6'5", 245 pounds. I just really, really like his potential in Denbrock's offense this year at LSU.
Yeah, he's got the bloodlines for sure, being Jason Taylor's son. I'm just looking up Denbrock's production from a tight end standpoint. Yeah, I mean, he had 39 receptions, 55 targets last year in 14 games. Had some really good years coaching at Cincinnati, Josh Weil, right? Josiah DeGuara. So he's produced really good fantasy tight ends in the past. And I think this is an ascending talent being a sophomore, Mason Taylor.
Yep. Let's go over to the defending champs, Mike, Georgia Bulldogs, where Carson Beck is going to get the start at quarterback. And look, Georgia's loaded again. They bring in Dominic Lovett, who we mentioned when we were talking about Missouri. They had Lab McConkey coming back. We've got Dylan Bell in there at wide receiver 3. Brock Bowers, probably their best receiver, the tight end. He's back again. They bring in Rara Thomas, who was a transfer from Mississippi State, big play receiver, Arian Smith. Like, is this the same problem with Georgia as we have every year, where they're just going to be so dominant that it's really difficult to rank any of their players high because they don't necessarily have to lean on one guy? And I'll even make that same argument for Brock Bowers, because they never really, really lean on Brock Bowers until they need him.
Yeah,
at least so it seems to me.
They won 2 straight national championships. Do we have to boast about Georgia so much? It's the same situation for me with the Bulldogs this year. Brock Bowers, you spoke to it, right? He's a top 5 college fantasy tight ends. Preferably you want him in a best ball format, because who the hell knows when, outside of when they get to the, hopefully not the national championship this year, but if they get to the playoff this year, they're going to feature him. But during the regular season, you have no clue when those, 30-point games are going to happen, or is he going to give you 6 points and 1 reception? So that's it's the same dilemma with Brock Bowers. I think the same with the running back situation. I know they have a new offensive coordinator in Mike Bobo, who was with the team last year, but just kind of reading up, it sounds like they're going to split it again, right? With Kendall Milton, Dywan Edwards, Branson Robinson. So I think you're going to see a 3-way split there in the backfield. I don't know. Do you have any outliers? Is there anybody that maybe could pop here that we're not talking about outside of Brock Bowers?
So I do have a share of Carson Beck in best ball as a quarterback 5. I'm going to take that upside of maybe he throws 4 touchdowns and 300 yards 3 or 4 times this year, and I get a few performances out of him. My concern with Georgia is that we miss on a really good fantasy running back. But to your point, I'm just playing the percentages here, and I'm just going on some recent historical context where I just don't think we're going to get a workhorse back from Georgia. And so my fear is that we do miss out, that maybe a Kendall Milton or an Edwards or one of those running backs becomes one of those 170 carry, because let's be honest, 175 carries for Georgia over 12 games as a workhorse back because they're going to spread it around a lot. My fear is that I'm going to miss out on that. Is that Kendall Milton? I don't know, but I'm rolling the dice and say Georgia's, and look, we talked about it, the schedule, right? They had to drop Oklahoma this year because of their future dates of coming into the SEC. So they had to reschedule another cupcake. Georgia, until maybe they get to that Tennessee game, I don't know where they actually are going to be threatened to lose a game. So if I'm Georgia, and we talked about this with Ohio State and Michigan, it's all kind of, they're playing basically 9-10 games this year where they're just trying to stay healthy. They really only need to be there and show up for probably 3 to 4 games this year, and 2 of those are going to be in the postseason.
Yeah, and this isn't like a Michigan where you haven't won a national championship and you really need to ramp up your team. I'm sure Kirby Smart's going to do the same thing, but maybe you get lackadaisical if you won 2 national championships in a row at this point. I would say this: I don't construe it at all that I'm expecting this at all, but you get an offensive coordinator change in Mike Bobo. You look back, how many studs did he have at Colorado State, right? With what he produced with the Rams back then. You look back to his one season at South Carolina, he had Shi Smith, if you remember that name, was averaging 9.3 targets per game. He would have hit 100 targets that season if he had stayed healthy. Unfortunately, he didn't. He only played in 8 or 9 games, but he's got a long track record of featuring a receiver. You got Lad McConkey, Don McLovett, you brought in from Missouri. Again, not expecting this at all, but there is a track record for a high value wide receiver in Mike Bobo's offense in the past.
Yep. And I look at their schedule and all their tough games. Look, South Carolina home, Kentucky home, Florida home, Ole Miss home. They go to Tennessee in the second to last week of the regular season before they get Georgia Tech. To me, I mean, it's all about Georgia staying healthy this year and getting ready for the postseason. I don't know how they drop a game. Maybe that game at Tennessee gets tricky, but that's my fear, is that we miss out on one of those studs that Bobo has historically given us, whether it's at running back or receiver. That's my only fear. But, maybe he's learned to evolve his play calling as well and his scheme, and maybe he spreads it out. But that's my fear with Georgia is I miss one of those studs in one of the best teams in the country. But for right now, Brock Bowers for me, head and shoulders at the top of the list of draftable Georgia players. And like I said, late stab for me has been Carson Beck, just because that talent is so good around him as a quarterback 5 and a best ball. Why not?
Yeah, and maybe we spent 10 minutes too many talking about this, and it's going to be the same Georgia offense that we've seen in the last 2 years, and it's Brock Bowers and nobody else.
Maybe so. Well, last team, let's go over to Alabama. Save them for last. There's a lot of questions. There were questions in the spring on who was going to be quarterback. Nothing seemed to develop, and so they bring in Tyler Buchner over from Notre Dame, which offensive coordinator Tommy Rees is there as the play caller. So he brings in Tyler Buchner from Notre Dame. The roster still has talent. That running back room, it's loaded again, Mike. Jace McClellan, Justice Haynes. There's some options there at depth at Alabama. Ja'Cory Brooks at wide receiver 1. You've got Malik Benson, the JUCO transfer that comes in. That's kind of been the talk of the town. Jermaine Burton is back again. You got Kobe Prentice back, Isaiah Bond. And, the problems last year was that we never really did get that wide receiver 1. So the question is, do we just have a bunch of serviceable receivers again for Alabama? And then they did bring in CJ Dippre, the tight end transfer from Maryland as well. I have some thoughts on Alabama from a fantasy standpoint. So I'll go ahead and just kind of kick things off. Let me go ahead and kick things off. I think Tyler Buchner is going to be the quarterback when we open up the season. I think he's going to be the quarterback for Alabama. I don't have any shares of him. I'm still a little nervous to invest anything. If I was in a traditional redraft, I would go ahead and maybe take Buchner as maybe a QB 3 or 4, but he's not one of my top 2 tight ends. Jace McClellan, I don't love as a running back, but I can make a case where Jace McClellan will be used more as a primary running back 1 in the Alabama in the Alabama offense, where I was saying that was scaring me off of the Georgia running backs. I can make a case where he's going to get more of the major work in that Alabama backfield. So I do like him. And in 2 best ball drafts so far, I think the one player that I think that is undervalued right now is I really love Ja'Cory Brooks as a receiver this year, as wide receiver 1 for Alabama. I've got in the 3 best balls I've done, I think I've got him at least twice. There's a lot of attention being paid to Malik Benson right now, the JUCO transfer, but we saw that last year with the Louisville transfer that came over. What was his name that got all the attention?
Say that again.
The Louisville transfer that came over to Alabama last year, where we were talking. Man.
Yeah, I'm not going to think of it.
Yeah, he didn't even have that. He hardly played.
Not worth thinking about.
But I feel like that Malik Benson is getting a lot of attention in fantasy circles, and I think that Ja'Cory Brooks is being completely overlooked. And I've gotten him in 2 or 3 drafts. I really, really like him this year. Tyler Harrell was the guy I was thinking of, right? I really like Ja'Cory Brooks this year, Mike. Right now, he's the one guy that I'm invested in this Alabama offense. I do like the fantasy appeal of the system of Reese and the potential of CJ Dippre coming over from Maryland as that receiver tight end. But for me, I like Ja'Cory Brooks more than any other player on this roster. I'd probably put McClellan as the second best option. And I think I'd rather roll the dice with Dippre right now in that tight end spot. And then Malik Benson, for me, stands as the 4th best option in this offense. That's where I stand on Alabama right now.
Yeah, I just, this is, when's the last time that we've been this confused, or there's been this little of interest in the Alabama offense? It's been maybe once or twice other time under Nick Saban, right? So where do I stand? I'm out on the quarterbacks at this point. I don't know who's going to start. Did you see McElroy put out today that he believes Ty Simpson is going to start? So
okay,
everybody has an opinion one way or the other of the 3 quarterbacks and who potentially is going to start. Who's to say that who's going to start is going to end the year as the quarterback? So I'm kind of just out at this point. Even though I project Tyler Buckner to start, I haven't drafted anybody in that group. Running back, I don't have any of Chase McClellan at this point. I could regret it. I think 15 to 18 carries is guaranteed at this point, which again, that kind of speaks to maybe a mistake on my part of not investing more in Chase McClellan. We expect kind of guaranteed touches from him, plus Alabama to run it a little bit more. I think Justice Hayes has just been in the back of my mind, the way that they're hyping him up, both in the spring and then during summer workouts. So who's to say that he's not going to eat into that carry distribution that could potentially go to McClellan as well. And I think you would agree with this too, that they will ramp up his workload as the season goes along. And if McClellan isn't that next man up, I guess you could say, at Alabama, that maybe Justice Hayes works his way into that mix, and maybe it's a 50-50 split as the season goes along. And then quickly on the wide receivers, I don't know. I'm kind of out. The 10.4 fantasy points per game from Ja'Cory Brooks was the lowest mark in the last decade for Alabama wide receivers, and the quarterback situation is getting worse. So I don't have a strong opinion there. I'm just kind of, letting people draft Malik Benson, Ja'Cory Brooks, and I'll live with the results there. So
yeah, I look at the Alabama schedule, Mike, and I think it really shapes up well. As you mentioned, you think they're going to, break in Haynes a little bit at a time. I think it really sets up well for McClellan. They get Middle Tennessee out the gate, and then they get Texas at home, right? When you look at the schedule, then they go to at South Florida, but the schedule isn't easy at all, but it's not super tough. They get Ole Miss at home. They're going to have to score points. They go to Mississippi State. They'll win that game, but they're going to have to score points. They go to Texas A&M, tough game. Arkansas at home, Tennessee at home, off, LSU at home, at Kentucky. They're going to have to rely on some really good players. I don't think Alabama is just going to run through and rip through this schedule. I think they're going to have to lean on some playmakers this year. The question is, and here's the thing. They couldn't do it last year with Bryce Young at quarterback. There was just something about that offense that looked off. Can they get the quarterback position figured out? If they do, I think there's some potential for the running back 1 and wide receiver 1 this year in this offense. And we may be under, I mean, look, I've got Ja'Cory Brooks in the 40s right now. I'm starting to think maybe I might have him a little undervalued. I've got Jace McClellan, I think, are in the 30s right now. He might be a little undervalued. If Alabama's offense gets their feet underneath them in those first couple of weeks, particularly coming out of the Texas game, those guys will be a lot more valuable than where I have them ranked right now.
Yeah, I was going to say that was kind of my argument in favor of Jason McClellan, is that you get through that opener against Wofford, or let's see, not Wofford, Middle Tennessee, and then you get to that Texas game. You know, you got the 5-star freshman, but who are they going to lean on in that expected competitive matchup? It is going to be McClellan. So that's partial of the argument in favor of McClellan there. So I don't know. I don't have a lot of shares in this offense, and maybe that's a mistake at the end point because it is Alabama. But you know, we'll see. It's gonna be very interesting to see how that pay attention to the practice reports during fall camp. I think that's the takeaway here too with Alabama, is that it's going to be imperative just because of the potential upside that we've seen in the past with the Alabama offense.
Well, look, Mike, that's going to wrap up your favorite conference in the country, man. And, you know, the one question that I'll have for you this year is, which SEC team is going to win the national championship this year?
Did Michigan move to the SEC? I missed that news. Yeah, Michigan might play.
Memo yet?
Michigan LSU in the national championship is my prediction as of July 17th. Michigan LSU, and go blue as national champs.
There we go. The man is on record. Well, look, Mike, that's going to do it. Long show, but always fun. This wraps up our preseason preview series with the conferences SEC. We're going to be working on a lot of stuff in the summer. It's going to probably be another week or so before we get this out, but we're going to try to get these last podcasts out in a hurry. We'll have some other content coming everybody's way. The preseason fantasy draft guide will be updated throughout the summer and fall as we get news out of camps. The Discord is going to be the place you want to be to get all the latest and greatest updated player tidbits from around the country. The college fantasy community we have built up in there is second to none. And we appreciate all the support that you guys have given us. You've allowed us to get to this point, and we're just going to keep delivering for you guys. So a very warm-hearted thanks from Mike and myself here at the CFF site. A lot of things to come and a long season ahead of us. So that's going to do it for the preseason preview series. Wrapping up the SEC. For Mike Bainbridge, my name's Joe DeSalvo. Until the next show, we'll see you guys. Till then.